Yeah, Frode.
Oh, hello, you're here. Did
Are
you
you in
get,
black and white?
what do you mean black and white? Am I in black and white?
Oh, it was just not so saturated colors. It wasn't black and white.
Sorry, I shouldn't get more of a tan next time. Did you get an email about the monthly meeting yesterday?
Nope.
I think I sent it to the wrong mailing list. Well, not, I don't have a mailing list, but the wrong contact list, because I got a few emails from people who aren't actively part of the project saying, take me off the list. So it was a bit embarrassing, but anyway, we had a meeting yesterday. It was quite a good one.
Yeah, I saw the recording. It's super interesting about the diagrammatic aspects of text and many interesting discussions.
Yeah, I thought it would be right up your alley, and I was wondering why you weren't there. And when I saw these messages come back, including one of them from somebody I've invited to be part of the book who couldn't last year. He was in this list, and he came back saying, please take me off the list. And he's the one whose book I'm reading right now. So it was actually a bit embarrassing, but at least it reignited. I have a feeling I've seen you somewhere before. Who is this lady? Oh,
Hey,
it's
it's
been a
been a
while.
while.
Nice to see you.
Thanks. Nice to see you as well.
Is that a new games console in the background?
Well, it's not mine exactly.
Okay, well, considering all your work, I know you're busy. So, Mark, you also did not get an email about yesterday's monthly meeting, right?
I don't think so, but I was at a conference anyway, so I couldn't have attended.
Yeah, no, it's just, I think I have FOT as the shortening for future of text. I think I sent to the wrong people the day, right before. So there was an overlap of people who should be there, but you should all have gotten one earlier. I know they are a bit mailing listy, these emails with all kinds of dates and stuff, so I apologize. Anyway, there aren't that many left before the end of the year.
Much of this week was in between the conference sessions updating the data set anyway, which took me embarrassingly much longer than I thought it would.
Yeah, it's interesting. Did you see my reply that Lisa has now made those changes?
Oh, cool.
It's been an interesting learning curve because I asked her to remove the line breaks in the introduction and add the little paragraph icons or glyphs, and she said that would require a huge amount of work. So it's interesting to see what fits in people's workflow and what doesn't. Bizarre.
Yeah, my takeaway is I wrote to probably not everyone here, so I'll just sum up. Was that what I took away from that whole thing was that if approaching another publisher, academic publisher, and in the interim, is to just make sure that there's somebody, whether they are in charge or not, who is available in the loop, who is, to put it bluntly, technically competent in the subject. The problem here is you had a very well nice person, but effectively middle manager with no agency. So it was a game of whispers, Well, you ask and which is no fun for anybody. But I'm resolutely positive about the whole thing. It's out, it's launched, it's running, and I think we can build from it.
I thought for a second Raphael had got contacts, but no.
No, I would never use contacts. Okay. Just the thought of putting something in my eye.
Yeah,
me too.
Not pleasant. Yeah, no, Mark, it's interesting because you and Peter, whom I guess will be here, are very much in a mindset where you can understand BibTeX. And I agree with you. It's not that weird. I mean, there are lots of issues with it, but we did actually make them a video walkthrough. And we
I
did.
mean,
No,
the problem is, I think that the issue is, I mean, first of all, I'm not a computer scientist, and I wouldn't dignify.
you
I wouldn't-
actually
I
are.
wouldn't-
You actually do have a.
No,
PhD in
I'm
computer
not. I'm
science.
not, and I don't have a
You
computer science
are, you're
background.
not a computer
I've
scientist. You're not a programmer, but you are most definitely a computer scientist, Mr. Sir.
Yeah, but well, except I have a profound respect for people who have a real art of doing this, and the point being that to implement VM properly, you need someone who isn't saying, what do I have to do to tell somebody else? You actually need somebody somewhere in the loop to say, okay, I understand that. I understand, or I don't understand, but ask the question that then allows you to say, right, well, it's this.
Mark, ideally, but I agree with you more on your point that we need a really good introduction for people to use it. Hey, Peter.
Hello.
I saw your email, both with Mark and also individually, about using Visual Meta on the web and issues associated with that. And, you know, should we have @MISC, should we have @web, all those issues. I think it's time that we accept that we are only inspired by BibTeX, as Mark has said many times, and just hardcore say, this is what we're doing. And, you know, I don't think we need to interfere with the @article or @proceedings. Leave it with whatever people want. But inside our extensions, that's a great place, because we currently have specifics for who the author is. Why not have an extension in there that says what kind of document this actually is, or source?
Like it.
Yeah,
I've been waiting anxiously for this topic of Visual Meta on the web because I want to put them on the back of the cards of the things that we are making for any kind of media, not just text.
and to a certain extent, I mean, if I feel positive about it, is I think I said at the Vint and Freud's presentation at ACM. My view of this is that BibTeX was best of a bad bunch to get us going, and the sooner more people engage with it, the sooner the people who really understand, are of a background to really understand the mechanics of this, get together and say, this is rubbish, we'll do something better, is good, because it won't be, let's just write another standard that no one will use. It will be, no, let's do this because this will now be the standard for this going forward, which is deliberate, as opposed to just, I put on GitHub, anyone can use it, which is lovely,
I know,
but it ain't going to make it
fly. It's temporary, I know.
Yeah.
I know, right. So, let's not go just down into Visual Meta, make this a big Visual Meta session today.
Yeah.
We do need to move above and beyond. But as a placeholder here, what should we call it? Document type start, document type end? Oops.
For what?
For what we're talking about, like, let me just label it. So this
So where's the self site?
that's just BibTeX. I don't want to mess with that. That's the one horrible BibTeX thing.
Okay, so the reference is right. So the thing with BibTeX is the problem for us is it's overly permissive.
Yeah. I know.
There is someone. No, let me just finish it. There is somebody who attempted to sort of sort this out, but actually, I don't think. I looked at. There's a Bib Clean or something. Really interesting project, but it's taken a bad turn. Some bad choices. One of which is to do first name, last name names, which is fine, but it's basically very English centric, and it's just something we should not go down. You do need to, if it matters that we give proper attribution to people, then we need to be grown up and learn that names work differently around the globe, and that's just how it is. Which you can't do if it's just first name, last name.
Yeah, but that's what we have that's what we're dealing with in the author.
No, absolutely, and we're addressing that. So in terms of the BibTeX, the other thing we can do is these supposed term, open curly bracket, that surrounds the site. That the original thing was written back, gosh, in the early 90s, so before the web really existed in a public sense. And so it just doesn't know how to deal with most of our modern communications. There's nothing to stop us. There is a term at online, which is widely used and understood by a lot of tools. So I'm minded to say, go with that for web stuff, because that a lot of tools will already know what to do with it. And the only thing that at name does is tell something that reads BibTeX that this is a journal article as opposed to a thesis, as opposed to a newspaper article. That's all it does.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just
No, I
it's
understand
very
that
outdated,
part.
very limited.
I understand, but there's a lot of stuff that in the future we can put in, and we should talk about it later. But it could be things like Peter said in the email. Part of a web page. It could really a lot of stuff could go in there on how it was captured, because
a lot of so most of the things that describe the web page are on the top, on the header part of the web page. So if we just had a little parser to read the header and extract the information as Visual Meta, would already be something great to have it, structured a little bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I'm excited about is that this is where Adam and Raphael can put in their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be for you, Adam, for instance, it could be, however, let's say where it is in relation to other elements in your workspace, that could go in there.
You mean spatially?
Yeah, for instance.
I think it's kind of the wrong way to go about it. That would. I still need an outer wrapper that takes care of that. I don't think a document will be in many places inside many workspaces. I don't think it could self-describe its position in every workspace. It would be the opposite of what I want. I want the workspace to say what documents are included and where they are, not the other way around. You can't expect the document to know every place it's.
No, but it can know where it came from. That's what I mean, right? So it really is origin. So let's say this was copied out of Adam's personal workspace on the history of plants. That could go in there. So that later on, when Megan looks at this, what was the origin of this? That maybe could be something useful. But also, now that we have Megan and Peter here, is this the kind of stuff that in your environment, with the kind of metadata you are interested in, you also want to be able to capture about the documents? I mean, the reason I ask is because I don't know much about law, unfortunately, but I know a little bit about military intelligence, where when information comes in, it is marked as the level of reliability and also urgency, and I believe, and also timeliness, right? So depending on the source, it'll have a very specific thing. Is there something like that in law you would like to have captured?
I guess how I see it is almost like an onion, if that makes sense. So, for example, if we take the situation of evictions and landlord-tenant agreements, which is really proliferated in light of COVID. So say that we start with a landlord-tenant agreement. Eviction is usually pertinent to a piece of legislation or regulation that governs evictions. So that is sort of the layer underneath the landlord-tenant agreement. And then another layer that sort of surrounds it is case law that involves evictions and past circumstances. And so they're not really individual legal documents, they're all related to each other. And so part of what makes metadata interesting is if we're able to very quickly unpack these layers, because it's all sort of a system altogether. It's if that makes sense.
Where it may relate explicitly to hierarchy or chain of documents.
One of the problems with our current citation approach is that we don't have a way to distinguish why you're citing a given case. A given case might contain a substantive doctrine related to landlord eviction, or you might be citing it because of some procedural issue related to the case, or you might be citing it because of an evidentiary decision that was made related to the case. And we're not capturing which facet of the case it was in our citation. All we know is that something in that case was relevant. Now, if we included metadata that we're citing this case for a procedural question, and then I'm looking for substantive material related to landlord tenant, even though this case is cited in a landlord tenant brief, I'd know that I'm not interested in procedure at the moment, or I'm not interested in evidentiary law aspects. Therefore, I don't even need to hunt down that reference at the moment, because I know beforehand that the citation to it had absolutely nothing to do with the substantive points that I'm currently trying to research.
Peter,
Also, if I could share my screen for a minute, I have a mini demo of a prototype interface for Visual Meta on the web that I like to show you.
Yeah, we want to see that.
So let's see what I have to do to activate the screen share now.
press the any key.
Let's see, where are we?
I see Brendan and Alan is here now. Hello.
Hello, jumping in late,
Hello.
but how is everyone?
Oh,
That's the way it is.
full house today.
Brendan, what's that flag behind you? Is that Guatemala or something?
That
Argentina?
is the city of Chicago, and it was made by my mother. She put together a wooden set of like barn wood into a flag.
That's really nice.
Wow.
The light blue just reminded me of that, but yeah, very nice.
Thank you.
Okay, here we go.
By the way, I mentioned that Monday's conversation was disappeared, and it only was from my view. Adam got in touch to show me the link of where I'd actually uploaded it earlier, so none of our meetings are lost. Right, yeah, let's have a look.
Okay, are we sharing properly now?
Yep, we're seeing your screen.
Okay. What we have here is a Citus page with Visual Meta widget. And this is using the HTML details summary element. So we open it up. Here's our Visual Meta content, and we have two buttons. First button, learn about Visual Meta. If you click that, it will automatically open the Visual Meta website in an adjacent window. And let's see. Trouble is getting back to the previous tab. Too many things open at a time, it seems. Here we go. Okay, now we're back. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We have copy Visual Meta. If you click the copy Visual Meta, this will actually transfer the Visual Meta onto the clipboard. So now, if we go into Reader,
Author.
or Author, okay, go into Author next. All righty. Okay. And we paste. There's our Visual Meta.
I
We
think
can't
it's in
see
another
your
screen.
author window, I'm afraid.
Oh, that's weird.
Did you share screen?
You probably shared. Yeah, he probably shared the browser instead of everything, right?
Yeah, that's
Oh, that must be what happened.
very easily done.
Okay, let's see. Let me go back to share again. Okay, so I was only sharing the one window, I see, instead of the whole. Trying to get back to where I was. Sorry about this. I never tried the screen share quite like this. Okay, we're back to the main page. Anyhow, just sort of take it for granted that when we pasted into Author, the block of Visual Meta appeared in Author. Next, let's see. Let me go to Zoom. Where? Okay, Zoom.
So how does this get added to the page? This is really,
Okay,
really
hang on.
nice
I'll
to
show you
see.
that in a minute. And let me go
Okay.
back and try to show you the author screen next. Oh, because then when we paste it into author, the visual meta appears in author.
Okay.
But it should paste as a citation.
It should. I'm not sure why it didn't, unless it's just maybe my syntax was a little bit newer than what author was looking for. Because I mirrored the syntax from the website.
Okay, hang on. Can you paste this into chat? I just want to paste it into my author.
Sure.
You
Let me
don't
do
mind?
that. You might be running the newer beta than my copy.
But it may be how it appears. I mean, of course, you know, the clipboard is a wonderful varied thing. It's not one thing, so it may just be that the way in which it's identified within the clipboard isn't quite being picked up by author. So the content's right, it's just not being flagged. So that's not necessarily it's not necessarily a fault in author or the other end. It's just, you know, making sure
it would be a fault of author because that's the point of it. But anyway, yeah, can you paste it into the chat, please?
Yeah, 1 second if I can find the chat now. All right, here we are, chat.
It may be that we're not parsing the entire visual meta, only the BibTeX part of it. So let me just have a quick look, a quick check. Okay, yeah, so if I do the whole thing, it's the same thing you have. But if I do self-citation only, oh, that's weird. If I only do,
Oh, a thing that shouldn't have happened has happened.
Okay, let me try to reshare and get the whole screen shared this time.
that's really weird, Peter. It doesn't, anyway, let's not waste everyone's time on the
Okay,
detail
yeah.
of the
I want to show
parsing.
the I want to show the main point next. Let's see.
There must be few things more boring than watching people look at parsing issues.
Okay, let me show you. Let me just go back first. Let's see, I think we'll try desktop 1. Okay, now are you seeing everything?
Think so. Seeing it.
Okay, that's better.
Yeah.
All right, now let's just hide author. Hide that Safari window. I think it's the wrong one. All right, now if I can find the right window. We're in Vivaldi.
Is this from your selection of 194 Safari tabs that you have open?
Okay, that's the problem. I was on desktop 2 instead of desktop 1. Now I can move stuff onto the right desktop and then you'll be able to see it. We're getting there. All right, now we should be good. Okay, the next feature we have, we showed copy visual meta. This was on clipboard. The next feature is a print visual meta checkbox. Now, this controls print visual meta checkbox is going to control whether or not the visual meta appears when we print the page. We're set so that by default, if we go to print, our print, this is what happens if we have print checked off, only the visual meta will appear when we print. Okay. Now, if we uncheck print visual meta and then we go do our print preview, the visual meta is hidden. So we're not going to waste any paper unless we want to use the paper. Now,
That's very nice.
here is what the code in this right-hand window looks like for our custom visual meta tag in the IMBA language. We start off by defining all of our properties. We set some default values for things that might not be known. We have a small function to toggle whether or not the page is going to be printed. That sets a printed variable to true or false. Next, we have the main tag representing our visual meta widget. And this is going to get converted into JavaScript as a standard JavaScript web component. So this would be usable outside of IMBA for someone who's just using web components. We use CSS attached to the component to make sure that unless the printed class is set on the element, the visual meta gets hidden when you go to print it. And we also make sure that the controls and the summary label are also hidden whenever we're printing. We then have a template describing the exact format of our visual meta. We can change this to whatever we want. I could also change it to only conditionally include elements of the template if they're present. So I can set up so that if there's no webmaster set, instead of printing webmaster unknown or whatever, it'll just omit that tag. Then we have the actual details tag, which is the representation of this in HTML. We have the printed class, which is only assigned if the printed variable was set with the checkbox. This block of code here, some styles describing inline how it's going to be presented on the screen. The summary block that says cite this page with visual meta. Then we have the actual visual meta itself, which is being displayed as code pre-formatted in the IBM Plex Mono font. We can set something else if we want. And then this is the actual instance of the instantiated visual meta. Then we have our control block, little formatting there, the button, and as you can see, the click action on the learn more about visual meta button simply tells JavaScript to open it. The copy visual meta tells the window to transfer the visual meta to the clipboard. And again, all the checkbox does is runs our toggle printed function. Now in the main code that is accessing that, let me just get so I can see. Okay, client Imba. We have some stuff that we're not actually using here, but let me get down to the bottom to show the visual meta in use. Okay, here's how you actually invoke your visual meta in the document. Ignore everything else on the page. Those were other experiments in code. So you'd simply use the custom visual meta web component. In this case, because we know that we have a black background, we set the color to white. You can do whatever you want for a dark light color scheme. We can address that as just extra icing on the cake. And all we do is we set the different property values. So these could be set to anything. And then the component automatically builds the visual meta for us so that you don't need to think about any of the BibTeX-like formatting. All that a person using the package would do is simply set the keys, the values for however we define them. Okay, so that was our demo. I'm going to stop sharing now.
That was really nice to see. However, here's a funny thing. In the visual meta generated, I think it's missing all the commas.
Oh, that, you're right. I have to put commas in. Okay, no problem. That's just tweaking the template.
Not the kind of thing I would normally notice, but considering our
No, thanks for catching it, Brooks.
arguing.
It hasn't happened anywhere else.
No, never, anywhere. Redacted. It's not spelled like this. Anyway, let's not go there. Right, yeah, that was very cool. We need to go into things with that. But now that we have moved the publication of the book till the 9th of December, which not everybody might be aware of, we have a few extra days to do a bit of writing, but also a few extra days to do a bit of implementing. I'm trying to do a really, really, really simple library/reference manager for Reader. It's because I commercially need it. I had a meeting with Valentina yesterday, my friend who is also helping with PR, and we realized that when a person goes from high school to university, they don't say, oh, I need a word processor. I must search about a word processor. But what they do often is say, I need some kind of reference manager. So the software we've developed, yeah, we're happy with it, but people don't search for it, which is a problem. So if we can legitimately call a bit of it a reference manager, we have another basket to get people. So we're going to try to do something really, really simple, both so it's streamlined and so it's cheap to make. But I'm wondering if the community here is more interested in looking at the bigger issues of what a 21st century proper citation manager can be, or would you guys like to talk about how to integrate with video and other multimedia, or about timeline? Where do you guys want to take the conversation? Or other?
I've got one question I just asked to pop back to what Megan and Peter described. So me being a bearer small brain, I just want to check I've got this correctly. So in terms of this idea of using it in a legal context, it seems to me that what I'm hearing described is that there are, in a sense, there are things that lie underneath what you're looking at, and then there is a contextual layer.
Hang on, I think I'm
that
refreshing.
sits around it. Is that, would that be a fair?
So maybe
We're having a bit of feedback
I've-
somewhere.
I've got this correct, please.
Sorry, did anyone get that, or was it all feedback?
Yeah,
Right.
it was fidgety for me as well.
Sorry. Okay, let's try again. So what I think I understood is that at the center you may have the thing that you're doing, which might be the, describing the thing. And in a legal sense, there are things that it clearly sits at the top, in that it draws from those definitively, because in a sense it's whatever, case law or something, but they are like foundational objects to the thing you're describing. But it is not so simple, because you can't just look at those two things. There is then the contextual thing that tells you that, yes, there is this thing that I'm doing, this case, there are these antecedents for it, but that's not enough to explain what it is. There is then a slightly more not so well-defined relationship to a number of things around it. So the point is that, so eviction in this jurisdiction is not the same as the same eviction case in a different jurisdiction. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, I think so. So I think you certainly got sort of my point about the layering, that you kind of have a basic document, and then behind it, so you get to say the subsection related to eviction. So you have an entire landlord-tenant agreement, say that's your starting document. And that's the contract that you're working with. And then say I'm a tenant and I am facing eviction. Then I will return to my landlord-tenant agreement and I would take a look. I think that's my starting point, right? Like, what does it say about getting evicted? And then usually in a sort of boilerplate contract, which happens with landlord-tenant agreements quite often, is this kind of reference to an evictions act. And this might be specific to the jurisdiction, it might be specific to the county. And that's kind of like the layer underneath. And then beyond that, there's case law relevant to that specific court that's involved, or whether it's the just evictions broadly, if you're looking at kind of like hierarchy of courts. So this is, I think, what you mean by the surrounding context. So yes, so the law is basically, it navigates across these different documents. And what is very promising about Visual Meta is that there might be a way to signpost those who are dealing with, say, a landlord-tenant agreement, and then they're able to navigate because they can know exactly which documents are pertinent to that particular clause relevant to, say, evictions. So I use evictions as an example because it occurred to me when I was helping out with a computational law clinic, and there are a number of students that wanted to code or program and create a computable contract, basically. And one thing that they raised was, how far do I have to peel the onion, essentially? And because they got to kind of the section about evictions, and they're like, wait, there's an Evictions Act. And do I need to codify that too? Like, how far back do I need to reach? And so the great thing about sort of not thinking about programming the law at this point, but just looking at how the law is structured, that every document is kind of connected to another in one way or another. And that when it comes to situations of dealing with law and technology, that we can't think of it as individual documents. We have to think about it as an architecture altogether. So yeah, so I think that's
good.
Yeah.
Because I think that's bridging. I mean, that's a neat, I mean, the thing that obviously springs to mind in that then is linked data. So you have a number of things. You have the thing you're talking about, the things it draws upon, the things that are contingent to it. In between them lie links, and the links have a relevance, a different relevance, a different reason. And I think without reinventing linked data, that can be captured, because the whole thing here is looking at this is it's kind of like a minimum viable product scenario, which is, look, doing visual meta seems like a useful thing because it's beginning to let documents be self-describing. There are many wondered and various ways in which one can do these things. So we're not trying to rebuild a new system, but I think how the onion you just described fits within visual meta is the fact that you can have a number of entities which might be rather like our references section that we're talking about. The extra source you'd put in would be the links. So you'd be saying that this thing links to this is relevant to the central document for the following reason. Like it's an underlying thing that makes this have reality. The contextual stuff you'd reference differently in that, and it might be in a number of different terms, but that then rebuilds the onion, the layers of the onion for you, I think, if I've understood correctly.
Yeah, that's spot on. And I think another area that would be interesting for visual meta is just helping out with the legal research engines that exist. So right now, a lot of lawyers and law students who have gone through law school struggle with actually using tools to help find cases in past case law. And one thing that I heard that really stuck with me was that you get caught in the prison of keyword search. And part of the issue with that is associated with the fact that there isn't metadata and that these documents are not structured. So what you have to do as a lawyer is you actually have to have a huge learning curve trying to figure out which keywords you have to punch in order for you to even remotely figure out which cases might be pertinent. And this is difficult, especially when you're building a case. You waste a lot of time doing trial and error for hours and hours trying to say, is this so say it's a firearms case, is this going to be the one that is specific, and that's where I can choose precedent or use as precedent and whatnot. So what I see with visual meta is that you can actually help layer in a way how people are looking at case law. So say this is firearms, it's associated with another precedent that you can immediately connect to. And again, I love the onion analogy. So you can keep sort of tracing those layers or peeling back those layers and sort of reconstructing it when needed. And this is really important for building a case. So yeah, those are just two ways that I already see visual meta as being really powerful potentially in the legal field.
Feels very similar to what you put together, Adam, you and Mark, around the citations for the ACM, the hypertext conference. Because the visualization of that, if I'm interpreting correctly, Megan, is really just like, how can I piece together what else is out there without necessarily needing to become an expert in this field just yet, because the learning curve is so high.
Yeah.
Peter's got his hand
Absolutely.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, another area where the law could draw from computing is how we deal with citations as imports. In a programming language, usually you'll have like a module, and on all the module things, you can name symbols that you want to export from the module, and then you can selectively import symbols from the module. So if when we were writing our opinions and writing our briefs, we had some affordances to allow us to basically label sub-chunks of the document we're creating, and then we imported those sub-chunks by name, we'd be able to immediately see what it was we were saying beyond just the rough page that it landed on. You'd be able to pull in the discussion of landlord tenant issues. You'd be able to pull in evidentiary issues from the case. So again, you'd be able to show what you were citing. The other neat thing is, if you define a term somewhere in the case law, it would be really nice if we could import that definition. So then later on, imagine that there's some new litigation somewhere that upsets the understanding of what that definition was. So we're dependent upon, case X, and it's a particular facet of case X that we imported to indicate that this is the portion of case X that's relevant to our use of it. You then imagine that a court comes along and they overturn the holding in case X with respect to some portion that wasn't what we cared about, in which case we don't need to do anything or even think about it, and our tool can let us know, we don't have to worry. But what if it said, no, we don't like that definition. Instead, we're going to propose some alternate definition of the term. And now you have more than one definition of the same term floating around, and you're not indicating in the document which one you're dependent upon. If instead in our metadata, we captured that we're getting the definition of this term from this source, and then you know that that source gets upset, the system could automatically propagate a notice to us that our use of that term is now called into question because of subsequent activity in the case law. So we don't have those kinds of hooks. Now, in a programming language, if you go in and you monkey with something, you can immediately see where the blame lies and what file caused your current code to break, because we have all those tools to trace the dependencies and the linkages that we don't have automated in law yet.
How would this be added, this metadata? Because it's very easy on one level to say it's easier to work with thing when, when it's all there. But if it's not part of a workflow, I don't think people would add it. So from your perspective in law, is this something that someone would be very happy to add if they had the capabilities, kind of like tagging pictures in Facebook, or would it become a drudge to do, to put it at those two extremes?
Yeah, so I think you raise a really important point, is that a lot of legal data is protected, or it's hard to just scrape, essentially. And I know at least in Canada, so I'm Canadian, there is this organization called LEDI, and they are the Legal Data Information Institute, if I'm not if I'm correct about that. And essentially, I think that they are groups that are rising, I think, institutions that would be interested in doing something like that and to do that type of tagging. I know that they have some systems and some process in place, but of course, they're in their infancy. At the moment right now, there aren't enough institutions that are interested in doing things like that. The other is Harvard, for example. They have a case law access project. I think it's called CAP, and it's done as the offshoot of the Harvard Law Libraries and Library Sciences. And they also, what they've done is they've essentially opened all of the case books since the beginning of US case law, and they've scanned it. And what they're doing is they're doing that type of tagging, and they're already trying to figure out ways to structure court data. The thing is, they are only focusing on US courts. So there's still sort of the gap around legislation, for example. And most kind of contracts, because they're formed by private parties, or if it's a lawyer who is helping create sort of these big commercial contracts, then you would have to look at contract startups or those types of organizations. So one of the big issues is part of, I guess, a larger problem in law and technology is that it's quite siloed between all these various institutions. So I think if you are looking for a starting point in how we might be able to kick that off, I would probably go first to LEDI in Canada or the Harvard CAP project. They seem to be somewhat more established, even if they are still somewhat in their infancy. I know that it's somewhat paradoxical, like saying that, but yeah.
Do you have links for those, please?
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. Interesting.
Very good, Megan. I wasn't aware of those projects. Thanks so much for bringing our attention.
Yeah, because it's interesting in this, because I'm sure if there was someone who did sort of linked data in the room, they'd be jumping up and down and saying, but we've done all this. And of course the problem is, yeah, but no one really understands linked data. So in a sense, what we're bridging to is pushing on open door. So in the conference last week, saw two really interesting presentations. One is where in Ireland, their National Records Office burned down in the revolution in the mid-20s, and they've been using all side sources. They've been reconstructing this, but as linked data. That's all fearsomely complicated, but the thing, one of the things I noticed is that the end point is that, well, we'll make something so clever that here we go. You do a keyword search and we give you the right answer. And I'm sure as a lawyer, and I'm married to a lawyer, you'll understand it's a bit more complicated than that. There are always edge bits. So one of the things that's sort of surfacing here is, yes, you want the relationship, so that the structuring, capturing the relationships is all very well, but you need a way in which you can play your own tunes with it. So some really interesting bridge work done here. Plus the fact that most humans don't want to interact with a linked data database. You know, I mean, it's not comfortable. It's not, unless it's going to be type something in a box and get, you know, an answer out, which is a really shallow way of intellectual interchange.
I think one affordance that lawyers would really love would be the folding and the focus modes that we have in Author. If you could just focus on a certain doctrine as it appears in the opinion, and basically have all of the paragraphs that aren't talking about that doctrine partially grayed out. It would make it so much easier. If you could fold the opinion to just pull up the section where they're talking about evidence, it'd be a lot faster than padding through the PDF, trying to find the right page, which is a real, it's a minor irritation, but over time it builds up. One of those things where if you can shave a few seconds off, it doesn't seem like much, but over the course of a week, you're looking at real time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of the problem is, do the ones who provide this, let's just call it metadata or context, are they the same ones who will benefit from it?
Yeah.
Because if you,
So they are all part of the broader legal community. Those who headed the two that I cited. So in Canada, Colin Lachance, he was part of CanLII, which is the largest legal research database in Canada. He was the sort of CEO for a long time until he decided to go on his own and spin off Leedy. So for him, he clearly saw that there was a demand. So those who actually start these projects, they're the ones that have seen the demand for it. And then circling back to Mark's point about, I guess, would lawyers be sensitive to this? I think right now with the keyword search, it's all about sort of relevance, right? At the end of the day, we're thinking back to, say, you go on a Google search. Many lawyers are giving up using these tools like LexisNexis or Westlaw, which are these legal research databases. They give up and they end up going on Google. What is happening is that it's just listing sort of relevant or tangentially relevant or things that seem to be related. What Visual Meta could do, and having sort of tagging and these linked data, is you're just refining relevance here. And it's not necessarily giving a answer, but it's giving maybe better options. So there's still sort of this human intervention where they have to choose which sort of case in the past or which relevant legislation, but at least with kind of this tagging, it's not as arbitrary as it is right now. And there isn't as much legwork going in through the trial and error process of finding which keyword might touch upon what you're trying to look for. So I think that regardless, I don't think that the legal community, if they are properly expressed or explained what meta linking data and like what Visual Meta or metadata tagging in general, what it could offer, I think that there would be a receptiveness to it.
I'm looking at, thank you for that, the site.case.law, and I'm looking at one random thing, and there's a long document PDF that I found. So if an important question would be, how are these PDFs generated? What is the manuscript format, do you know?
Usually, I think they are just scanned from hard copies that were printed over the years. So, and this is already pretty, I think, revolutionary at times, because people have for long gone to the actual prints. And so when you are citing, those are all the various volumes of past cases. So,
right. But for new ones, there's a new case, it's all done, and it needs to be published. do you know what the process for that is? Could we inject visual meta at that stage?
That would be a little bit more complicated because it goes directly to court reporters, and that's at sort of the public institution level. If you're working closely with Harvard Case Law Project, they have gotten permission from sort of court reporters to take these PDFs and structure them in the way that they have right now. So that's the only sort of area of sensitivity is, are you able to get the information from the source and be able to inject the metadata from the source? With Lady, it might be easier just because of the very strong partnerships that Colin has established in getting court data from Canada and Canadian courts.
Do you know
But
him,
I
by
think
the
at
way?
the Colin, yes, I know him.
So you could provide an introduction, maybe?
Yeah, I could reach out and see if he is available.
That would be very, very interesting because, of course, a human connection, no matter what technology, that would, of course, make things better. Okay, so the thing is, PDFs are entirely unstructured inside. That is obviously the problem. So if we are going to provide structure with visual meta, to do that after the document exists is really hard because we can add a few things, you know, like the literal citation stuff, but anything structural like headings and like Peter was talking about, it would be great if you could just go to the section which has own. So that kind of has to be done at the production. Otherwise, you're talking about doing machine learning to try to understand the document, and then you get into the kind of specialist work I'm sure lots of law offices do to have a competitive advantage, right? But obviously, see, this is the problem with political situations, and of course law is political in this sense, that if you have a secret tool to help you gain an insight that you can do something in a case, you wouldn't necessarily want others to have that unless, you know, you're a public defender or a public prosecutor maybe, because that same tool can be used against you to find if there were holes in your argument, right? So that makes me wary of how to go about it. I agree that it is important to do that. I mean, I would like to see, and I think everybody here agrees, some sort of law that states that these cases have to be presented in the clearest, most richly metadata way possible for easy understanding of it. But, you know, are humans ready for that? I'd like to think so, but I'm a bit scared.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Mark. I had
Okay. No, I was just thinking, because one thing to fold into this, and this might sort of help link back to things like, you know, things that Adam's done and things. Another aspect of this, if I try and sort of put myself into the legal space, is that, so you're constructing arguments is, you know, it's been really useful to see the visualizations Adam did, because if you think of, if you map that back into, say, a tool author that has a conceptual, basically spatial mapping sense, now things can start to be fun, because you can actually begin to leverage the relationships you talked about, the layers of the onion, and with a bit of manipulation there, potentially that could help you. Then that could then collapse back into the structure of the document. So these are the things I need to be aware of, but don't need to be in the case, or this is the thing I need to be aware of, but it needs to go in this section rather than that section. Now, I find that rather interesting too, because this gets back to the problem of the writing and the construction. I think to nod to another point Fred's raised is, I'm wondering whose rice bowls we're breaking here, in the sense that I assume there are some well-entrenched organizations whose income is providing. I mean, I think of Butterworth tax in UK, which comes out every year, and every year it just gets bigger, you know, because we seem to be unable to resolve our tax law and make less of it. So in a sense, there is an industry that lives to make its money off writing, giving you something that you have to keep buying. So, you know, would it be reasonable that I would pay the same amount for another of these big books, shelf bookstops kind of things, if it was actually presented to me as additional metadata every year? And that's not for us to worry about, but I think it's an interesting part of the whole. But I do think concept maps and this ability to just get out of the sort of the linear process and start investigating the relationships that you've said are innate to the sort of work you're doing is really powerful, because you can't do that in a Word document. Peter.
Yes, there might also be a bottom-up approach to introducing this. Internally, lots of firms have brief banks where if they have a large number of lawyers, they're producing similar documents, you want to be able to refer to every eviction brief that you ever wrote and cherry pick the best bits of it in your local document assembly program or whatever. So organizations like that would have self-interest in adding metadata for internal use to the briefs that they're writing so that they could structure and link them together and reach out into the greater literature. The other possibility on the small firm side is that you could have large numbers of small lawyers who would be on the opposite side of it. The big mega firms would be representing the landlords. The tenants are probably going to be represented by a lot of small, I just hung out a shingle, starting off lawyers and small legal aid organizations and things that don't have those kinds of financial resources, but they're all essentially on the same side of the legal argument. So they don't lose anything by helping another landlord, tenant, attorney defend his tenant from eviction in an unrelated matter. So their interests are aligned enough that you might be able to get them to come together as a community to pool metadata and start using these tools. If we had a nice painless tool that made it easier for them to write briefs and shave a little time off of it by pooling fragments of arguments with firms doing similar work for clients on the same side of the underlying legal dispute.
I showed this book the other day, and it really relates to what you were saying specifically there, Peter, and earlier. It's called Reinventing Discovery. And there's a great sentence in here. To historians looking back 100 years from now, there will be two eras of science, pre-network science and network science. It seems it's the same in law, that we don't yet have connected law or networked law. We still have paper documents, right? Of course, law is connected in our head, but technically, the connections are very weak. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I think the other side that you had raised is, I guess, the political element, and particularly many of legal documents, they thrive on what I call the strategic silences and strategic ambiguity. Particularly in drafting legislation, I know at least in the US, they benefit from actually perhaps not having the metadata that connects to what are the definitions or what are the possible definitions, because they want natural language to thrive, as in they want the word to change meaning over time or to allow for the space to grow. So Peter's point before about how you can connect, say, one case directly to a definition that was cited in another case, that could potentially find pushback because you may not want that definition to have that rigidity, and you want instead, I guess, that flexibility, and it might not be two options, it might be two or more. So that's kind of one comment that popped up.
Yeah, I mean, the scary bit for me is what we're talking about is very much expanding our brains, expanding our minds, expanding our horizons, expanding our opportunities, right? That is what this is all about in these tools for thought, etc. communities. However, you know, when you look at our evolution as a species, there is a lot of benefit from in many areas not to do that, especially for the quote unquote, the other guys, which is why I'm trying to focus on education with my work and with visual meta, because at least pretentiously, let's call it that, we want students to learn and have open minds and do it right. So maybe there is an in to law via students, like there is a, maybe we can.
Oh, brilliant, Frode. Brilliant. There is no reason for law students not to build interlinked structures like that. Provide, of course, their grade is structured so that contributing to that increases their grade, as opposed to their seeing themselves as in direct competition with their fellow students who are working in the overall knowledge base. But it was set up so that others could express sort of like a micro preference for some link that a particular student put in. You could create a system where there'd be an incentive for everyone to start building those connections and explicitly adding metadata in the law student level, where of course there are no clients, so you don't have to worry about conflict of interest issues that you might be inadvertently working against a past client or anything, because you don't have any yet, you're still in student mode. So that's a very interesting possibility, and it could even help in the teaching of law.
Yeah.
Also, there are a couple modes in which law works. You have sort of your civil law statutory mode, and then you have your common law with sort of principles of judging relative equivalence between examples in a case-based reasoning mode. And it really helps if you could have a tool to tease out that distinction and help you structure your arguments based on it.
One of the things that comes up in this book is a little bit against the, I can't see it on the shelf now, but there was another book recently about how the disconnected stuff is making us dumber. I don't agree with that, of course, but we are thinking in a more small way rather than just huge document way. Sorry, my computer went funny. Yeah, okay. Starting with students, helping students in law do these citations in ways that can be read interactively. Maybe a good start, right, guys? And when they publish their papers to a teacher, they publish it in a more structured way, so it would have all this. So when you're talking about the teaching of law, it would be easier for the teachers to also go through the students' work, right?
To a certain extent in law school, you don't really learn as much on the writing element, except for one class, which is on legal writing and research. So if you're thinking about this, that is a potential class or course where you would add that as a module, for example. The other side to it is to think from the clinic perspective. So there are legal clinics that help, usually it's training for pro bono work. And one side of it is there are new law tech labs specifically that are trying to target the access to justice problems, which part of it is access to legal information. So another area that if you're thinking from an education perspective, those are potentially spaces to explore.
See, back in days of old, West Publishing came up with a key number system where they identified all of the different kinds of issues and they actually attached numbers to them so that you could go in and find the number that corresponded to the evidentiary problem that might appear in a case. And then by searching for those numbers, only access the cases. So that work was almost already done, but it was in a proprietary format. And then the search engines got stronger. People moved away from depending upon the key numbers.
So let me ask you guys a question that I think everyone will want to hear the answer to. And that is, what is the point of a legal document, right? And what kind of legal documents are there? So a contract is a framework for how things should be running. But of course, if things go wrong, it's what you refer to, right? But these things, these documents, what are they actually? What is their function? Is it just a summary, or is it an attempt to persuade? What is their function?
There's no general response for that. For contracts, it depends actually down to what type of contract.
Mhm.
Like basic contract doctrine cites, it's the meeting of the minds. So as long as there are two parties and there is some sort of goal that they want to achieve together, whether it be a transaction or it's related to agreement to perform work together or some sort of, in short, it's the meeting of the minds.
Mhm.
There's legislation that is considered a legal document where it is citing a framework for governance for a particular situation that comes from public lawmakers. There is case law, which is specific to sort of a retroactive situation, a retroactive response to a dispute, usually. But there's also brief writing. So there are sort of associated legal documents. It's types of documents that are related to going before the courts for a dispute. So it really depends on the type of legal document. There isn't a single uniform response for what is the purpose of a legal
No, no,
document.
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a piece of legislation is politicians saying it shall be thus, and then bureaucrats helping them putting it in thus terms. And then lawyers will have to interpret it when they're fighting each other, right? So that may be an example where a project of taking legislation within a field, within a country to, oh, Brendan just left, sorry. This is all a bit confusing. We are, yeah, we're over time. So maybe that would be a better area where we could demonstrate, look, you've written this legislation, it's thick and difficult to understand, but if you publish it with this metadata, these are the ways that people can better interpret it and try to understand how it relates to everything else, right? Probably a bigger chance of getting in there rather than a document where somebody has a disagreement and they win a court case and then they have kind of a write-up and okay, so let's say that there is a court case, a simple disagreement, landlord, whatever. The documents that are produced, I know there are many different kinds, but isn't there one that is mostly a position by the defendant, let's say, or the prosecution writing, this is why we are upset with you? What would that be called?
Those are the litigation briefs. So those are the ones that you would submit before the court. And then what I define as sort of case law is the opinion of the court or like not the majority opinion, so the minority opinion. They have something called the dissent that is also published in both the US, the UK, and Canada. In sort of civil law countries, the dissent doesn't really exist for the public. There's only the opinion of the court. But I think what you're referring to is the litigation briefs.
So the litigation briefs are the ones that are most likely not to want to have this kind of tech because they are really making a point and they don't want you to see the holes. But the opinion of the court is something that maybe, I'm not saying that judges will start writing like this, but those are documents that would more want to be understood richly. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Peter, are you waving at me, or is that your hand up?
Yes, also there are unpublished internal documents and checklists are very common where a firm will go through and have looked at all the law and find all the issues and the likely related issues and even the evidentiary nuances. So a new attorney would be given the firm's checklist for an area to make sure that they basically tick off all the boxes to cover everything that's turned up in the past. So that might even be beyond the main thing and come to side issues like how are we going to start establishing that we have the evidentiary trail that we'll need in case things go sideways down the road. And it would cover, you'd have like secondary checklists for sub issues. So there might be a question of whether some testimony is an exception to the hearsay rule. So you'll like jump off to your little hearsay checklist and walk through that. And it's sort of like partially a checklist, partially an outline and template for writing the brief if it gets before the court, to make sure that all of the issues and the likely counter issues are addressed. So I might know that I'm arguing this should be an exception to the hearsay rule. We know that there's some related case law, and this should like be built into our firm's internal documents, so you're not searching for it de novo each time, that cover what cases hold sway with courts. And that's another thing. You'll look at whether courts are citing a given case, even if a case is on point. There are some cases that judges will go back to time and time again because they really like the language that the court used to frame the argument coming out one way. And this is also another big issue with judges. Lots of times, the brief that you see coming out of the court with its opinion is more a justification for a policy decision that had actually been made a priori. And you'll have some justices who really all you need to know is what's the political background of the parties before the court, and they will find some way to have the party that judge is biased towards to win. And if you have that information, that can help too, because then you might want to try to make an argument for recusal of that judge if you could establish some statistical evidence that he's not going to be fair in this class of case to a party that looks like your particular party. And that's a big area. And I think France had a big mess a while back where they were arguing that you shouldn't be able to build statistical databases of judges' opinions looking for that kind of evidence.
Because it may also support you to find out that this judge leans in your favor, right?
Yes, it could support you. Or, of course, it could also simply reveal that the judges are not all paragons of virtue, which the courts are very averse to having the public think in those terms. So the French courts didn't want to have those kinds of studies coming out. And I'm sure you have similar issues in lots of hot political touch button issues. So some areas of the law are highly political, some areas aren't. If you're going into, the nuances of tax law, it gets to be less political. If you're looking at commercial law, you basically have all the sides just trying to see how can we cover every possible contingency and pre-plan ahead of time everything could go wrong, so that if it goes wrong, there won't be any surprises. So in those bodies of law, you're trying to avoid surprise as much as possible. And the ultimate, of course, is if you can come up with a contract that's going to prevent there being any litigation down the road. So the one side law is I want to be able to win the litigation, but the better lawyer structures legal arrangements so that they don't wind up in court in the first place.
Yeah, so we're over time and running out of time. Very interesting, different discussion than we usually have. Yeah, I'm wondering where to go next with this, because we are now, Vint is talking to both Nature and Science about them using visual meta, which will be nice. And, I think we need to focus, but, not just in one area. And Adam?
Well, a quick report from the trenches then here in Stockholm. I tried to write an app, or I did write an app that transcribed our last office meeting, because we talked about doing this kind of asynchronous follow-up discussion where you could comment on different time points in the video and continue the discussion asynchronous. So I used Apple's magic machine learning. You promised magic, Frodo, or Frodo, as the machine learning call you in the transcript.
That's
It actually calls you Frodo. And I am adamantly something, and we will only talk about girls, but I couldn't find any girls mentioned in the actual office hours. But according to Apple, we talk about the girls all the time. Some word is transcribed as girls. So it's not magic. It's not working well, and I'm using what is called a state of the art. It's not state of the art. At least it can't understand Nordic accents, like, so it's.
I also, when I used this app, Descript that we talked about, and ran it through, it was good, but I was shocked at how incomplete my own sentences are in reality. You know, Mark Anderson is very flowery. I'm very choppy. You know, we all have our idiosyncrasies. See, I can't even say that right. So yeah, there will be issues with this, even if it captures it absolutely perfectly. But Adam, this is interesting to hear about.
It's lovely. Jerry keeps posting a link to me talking about one of the future of text things, and embarrassingly, alongside it is the YouTube sort of effectively, you know, text-to-speech transcription of what I said, and it's basically my hovercross is full of eels, which is
no, but that sounds like you would say that.
Well, possibly.
But this is, Adam, this is why it's so important to build some sort of an app where something is interesting. We hit a key on the keyboard, so we mark up as we go along and write little comments. So we don't rely on the transcripts to do everything for us, right?
And possibly the transcript can give you some pointers deep into the document where you could scan it to find some keywords that just get you on track. So it doesn't need to be a perfect transcript for citation, but rather for navigation, and it could be quite messy and still work as a navigation tool. But I wouldn't bet big money on the transcription tools, the machine learning, the magic machine learning.
But Adam, can't we be modular in our thought? In that you're absolutely right, and I'm from the same rather doubting camp. You know, it will. The next one will be better. Then it may not be good enough, but it's all the time. But I think we can modular enough and say, right, we know this bit of the architecture needs to be built, even if some of the bits we're connecting up, say the transcription is subpar. So, but if we're at the point where someone makes a better transcription, then we will have a tool that can do what Mark, we're talking about now. So I'm sort of tempted to say that, you know, perhaps, you know, we just have to at some point maybe look, because the thing is, the transcription, you can still say this point. The word may be gobbledygook.
Mark, have you ever listened to yourself?
Yeah.
Have you ever listened to yourself? You say so many.
I try not to.
You say so many flowery, poetic things that for a machine to have a clue of what you say half the time is not going to happen. I don't think, even if we have perfect transcription, which will happen, it's not going to solve the whole problem, because, you know, we've now had a chat for 1 hour and 16 minutes, and it's been really, really nice. Very few people in the future will ever want to watch the whole thing. So all this different things is just to create a summary of the bit that us as individuals think are worthwhile, and the means for someone to go back in to get the bigger picture from where they want, right?
Yeah, and as I've said before, it's more important to have a way of referring to specific sections where someone says a really good thing than to have the whole thing, because the future of text is heavy curation. We produce so enormous amounts of text, so we need small, minimal snippets from this conversation. That is what's useful, and maybe not even that, but maybe a comment to that to this whole conversation will be the real gold nugget.
We should have Florilegium of these transcripts. Florilegium is a type of book before printing where you would take all the good bits of other books and make it a flower book. So yes, but also, you know, Megan and Peter, you know, within, I guess, even law meetings, you have online meetings and stuff, and I guess you have transcripts of your meetings, and you have similar issues there, right? Of how to bother go through interviews and all that stuff later. So maybe there's some overlap there as well.
I'm not so sure about meetings, but it certainly exists already for contract summaries, and kind of drawing the key points of most contracts. They're starting to do more of clause libraries, for example, clauses that people think have been tested at a certain standard and that people can just kind of plug and play into new contracts. There's that from my knowledge. But.
I can see that transition. I well recall my wife saying that, you know, dealing with someone that said, but you put this in 3 times. Said, yes, well, it's very important. I said, I don't think that's how it works. You know, and so having systems that sort of cut through that sort of crap, I think would be remarkably useful.
But Adam, so your app, what is it? Can we try it? Can we play with it? What is it actually built in and stuff and so forth?
It's just a regular Mac and iPad app, a minimal one where you select MP4 recording a video file and it puts out a long transcript. It's no magic yet, so it was just a way of trying the technology. And one thing is to think about is how you actually manage the timestamps, because you want a timeline and some timestamps as a visual reminder, but you want to timestamp sentences, and if you talk like me with no complete sentences and half-finished sentences, where should the timestamps be? Should they be in the pauses, or should every word be kind of annotated with a timestamp? And that's kind of an interface thing and a citation thing as well.
Let's talk about the basic thing that can be done now. Put a video on YouTube, get to the interesting bit, control-click and choose copy link to this point in time. So that's going at it from the video side, and it really works. It's very, very useful. You're asking the question, if you're looking at the transcript, how should we generate the same type of link, right?
Yeah, kind of. Yep.
So,
or how should they be presented side by side, and what is the relation when you navigate both the transcript and the video file, and you want to find either a specific thing or you want to highlight things? How do you interact with the text?
Would be quite simple. We have a video in the middle of the screen. On one side, we have the chat, and things show up as you have the entire chat window live all the time. But there you can click on, and if you click on one, it'll show you the time in video where that was added. That in itself would be useful, right? And then on the other side, you have the transcript as raw as you want with multiple finds and views, so you can skip around using that. And then the key is to be able to then copy time from this, write your notes about the meeting. Maybe that's at the bottom of the screen. So, because when I upload the videos of these meetings, I write nothing. I decided that should be my policy, because otherwise I'll highlight kind of the wrong thing. But imagine if we all could write a bit, and it's in relatively plain text. So you can, let's say, Adam, after the call, I've uploaded the video, you send it to me, and I add it to the description, and then Mark does the same. But that description is actually useful. So without extra stuff, if we have a browser tool that can access this YouTube video and the description, which is API easy, that means that we can then, with no further work, have each one of our summaries just automatically there. Because the whole point of this is, like, for instance, today, because we talked about law, both Megan and Peter raised really interesting things that are appropriate for all of us, plus visual meta stuff. And, Megan, you may want to be able to refer back to when I asked if you could introduce your colleague to us, which would be great. And then there are other things. That's the kind of stuff we want to be able to have for our own captures. Like maybe we have a keyboard shortcut that action item for myself, right? Or action item for someone else. Those things would be really worthwhile to be able to go back and see, right?
Yeah, and to add links or references to things that not force Megan to find the different Canadian URLs. Maybe it's good to do it directly, but in some cases you want to add more later on, and to insert thing into the timeline would be very useful. And last time I mistakenly called Gordon Brander's thing Substack instead of Subtext, and his project is called Subtext, and I wouldn't want to add a link to it here, but now it's eternalized as the wrong thing. So it would be very useful to add things to a video.
Errata for video, right, Peter?
Sounds good.
But it would also be good. I mean, because I often keep an eye on the chat as we're going through, and I'm just sort of, it in the browser, it's add tab. And actually, the time I probably want to go and look at that isn't straight after the call, because that's probably what I want to do, to just clean out all the kitty litter I've now created in my browser. It's more that being able to go back. So, oh yeah, we talked about that last week. That was that interesting subject. These three sort of things came up, and I'm now I'm in the frame of thinking about it, being able to go back. So I think that sort of linkage would be remarkably useful.
Yeah. And I'm not not under any illusion that people would add lots of things to the backlog, but maybe if you weren't on the call, you want to say a few things, or if you dropped out of the call, or if you say the wrong things, or if you promise to add something, you may add it later. And some people are really detail oriented and just want to set the record straight, and they do it more often. Very useful.
I misquoted myself when I said.
So we have to consider, we don't own Zoom. So Zoom is just a flat thing as far as we're concerned. It does export different things, of course. So what we're talking about is at the end of a Zoom call, when the file is rendered, it opens up into this app type thing. And this app type thing was running during the call. So let's say it records some audio just so it can line things up, because that shouldn't be rocket science, right? So when the video is then open, all our little, and let's say we actually make our own chat system. No, that's where we're going to do the chat transcript. Okay, that could be important, but just the simple thing of, okay, so let's say right now we're designing a product. And often calls are about designing the product, not necessarily software. It could be any kind of product, including a document, including, let's say a legal brief for the sake of argument. Let's say that at some point someone said something that is a product feature, which is important to us. If we do if we have this other app running and we just press the keyboard shortcut for feature or the tag or whatever, it should then timestamp that maybe plus 10 seconds earlier, something like that. So if we're able to just tag different kinds of things by our own needs as we're watching something, and then have that app open it and put the video and that together, that in itself should be really, really powerful. Because then later on you can go back and tag too. It'll be a separate layer. Adam can, look for where he said Substack and tag that as I actually meant something else, So just to be able to tag live and tag after, that should solve a huge amount of going through stuff later, shouldn't it?
But still, this is also in relation to, is this what we're going to, if we can only pick one project, the last few times we talked about maybe 10 different projects, different people have their favorite project, and I'm all for picking something that is very common to all of us. Is this common enough? I really want this, but is it useful enough for Mark or
I like the
Peter?
reference manager project better, personally.
What'd you say, Peter?
I like the reference manager project better. I think we get more mileage out of that.
The reference manager, I'll try to make happen within my little world to a basic level, and then we can explode it together. So we have a bit of infrastructure. And I'd love to talk to you, particularly, Peter, about some of the storage, because I'm thinking in this world, if you cite a book, what happens is a PDF is generated and saved into your library about that book, and same about a web page. So there's no database. It's only stored in PDFs, whatever the media is. So I think we can have an interesting discussion there. But I would very much like to be able to cite our meetings. I think that is important for a lot of people. And not just, from this time in a YouTube video. I mean, imagine on the 9th of December, when we do a bit of a demo, we can say, yeah, we've done this and this. And this is the document we have to show that where we got to that point, and it has this stuff in it.
I can speak something to that, because having been through the Hypertext Conference 21 papers, it was only some 35 papers, but it was really interesting. Nearly all the social networks papers really didn't cite any peer-reviewed data at all. It was all blog posts or X-Archive, which is weird because that's basically unpeer-reviewed pre-published papers. But you have to question, so what is your scholarship based on? So there is this point, absolutely valid. If you live in the modern digital domain, there isn't a necessary copy of note. So actually being able to go back to say, well, here is a recording, here is an annotated version of this. These people said this at this time. You may not agree with it, but at least you can't argue that it didn't happen. So I think that's actually very, very valuable.
Yeah, I'm just pasting in here.
While you're doing that, quickly for Peter and Adam, I hope you got an email. I just to say that I've updated the Adam's current demos to use the newer data set, and I sent it to Peter because you might want to use it, for some of your own dev. But,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And we haven't followed up on that prototype thing more. Should we continue working on that timeline in some way, or some similar timeline?
Oh,
or
okay.
is it should we?
So here's the thing, this and that, the way it connects to me is what we're dealing with is three things here. We're dealing with documents, primarily PDF. We're dealing with the clipboard, how we move stuff, and we are also dealing with stuff on the web, right? All of this, it's not one or the other. So for the discussion thing, if we have the transcript and all that stuff, it will necessarily have to point to YouTube at some point, even though much of the stuff is available in the document. For the timeline, I think it's a similar thing. I would incredibly much like to be able to move between a document and the timeline view in a useful way as an author or as a reader. So there has to be the means through which I can create a link to view this citation in the timeline, for instance. Wow, was that a house phone? Wow.
Not mine. I do have one.
Not mine.
That was so cool, right? Yeah, I think we should work on the timeline, absolutely, for sure. I mean, I think it would be great if, for instance, for my own thesis, I could export it in a way that at the last page in a reader that knows this stuff, there's a button say, open this entire reference section in the timeline.
Mm.
So everything is grayed out except what I used, and you can see how it connects.
And just knowing where stuff comes from, is this bit of law that I'm leaning on, did it come from, 1220, or did it come from last week? And it may not matter, but it's useful. It's useful to know, because things that just happen, have a different sort of relationship. Things that are long established are broadly long established and less argued about. It doesn't mean they're better, but it is the case that at least they're more of a known thing as opposed to something that just happened last week. So this ability to see things in a temporal aspect, I find remarkably interesting. It's not the main thing is it's not the answer. It's this classic thing. It's another view of the same data, allowing you to gain more insight and more understanding from it. And it's all sitting off the same document or the same body of text that may or may not at that point be a truly linear sort of finished document. It might not be the totally polished brief.
Yeah.
But at the start point, it's all this stuff, most of which probably I need to use. It's coming together, and actually being able to sort of spin things out to a timeline or to a concept map is something I do on a daily basis in the Tinderbox tool I use. But that's used by a very small amount of people. But I think it would be great if more people had access to these affordances, because it really enriches our use of digital tools.
Yeah, cool. Peter?
Yeah, one very interesting example at how law gets woven together is the Creative Commons project, where they have basically two layers to their licenses. One's like a human readable, very clear, simple, ordinary English explanation of the license, but then that's linked to existing legal language that's known to have been battle tested in court. So no matter how confusing and opaque those clauses are, you know that they're clauses that have been reused time immemorial. But then as the person looking to pick a license to attach to a work, you're just looking at the nice high level summary, and you basically trust in the lawyers working behind the scenes at the project that the linked technical version of the language is going to achieve the result that the broad, non-commercial use. Okay, I can understand that and wrap my head around. I want to have non-commercial use. I want the work to be shared under the same license. Nice, high level, easy to use concepts, but then you tie those to the legalese that has been litigated to death and is going to be upheld by most courts. So that's a very nice approach of showing how you can have the metadata link between the overview summary and the detailed representation. And of course, the mix and match, compositionally building something up.
Muted, Fred.
I didn't say anything interesting. Right. Okay. I think we need to Megan's got to run. We've got to run. Okay. Yeah. You guys are working on a connected piece, which is wonderful. I look forward to the next chat as far as what we should work on. Just organizing ourselves. I think that's a huge thing. So we should also find a name for our app if we make one together. Anyway, have a good weekend, everybody. And see you hopefully soon. Bye.
Take care. Bye.